Welcome to the Agent of Wealth podcast with Marc from Bautis Financial. In this podcast, Marc helps guide you towards financial freedom, ensure you never run out of money, and create a balance in life that prioritizes what is most important to you. Join us for this journey as Marc draws from years of expertise and guest experts to solve the multiple wealth building challenges involved in your financial life.
Welcome back to the Agent of Wealth podcast. This is your host, Marc. Most information out there on planning for retirement either comes from advisors like me or even from academia. But today I brought on a special guest onto the show, Fritz Gilbert. Fritz is going to provide a unique perspective on retirement. He wrote about his retirement journey every week for the past 5 years at the Retirement Manifesto, an online blog that he founded to share his experience as he prepared for and transitioned into retirement. Fritz is also the author of a newly released book, Keys to a Successful Retirement, Staying Happy, Active, and Productive in Your Retired Years. Fritz, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Marc. It's an honor to be on. Great to chat with you, and appreciate the honor.
Yeah, so like I said, it's pretty cool to have a unique perspective on retirement, someone that actually went through it. How did you decide to start chronicling, and create your blog?
Yeah, it's actually, I tell the story in my book a little bit about, if something kind of intrigues you and you've got a curiosity about it, just take the first steps, right? And I think my blog is a good example of that. I had a curiosity about 5 years ago. I've been a DIY investor for 30 years, always liked personal finance, and never really did writing. I mean, other than kind of my corporate job, emails and things you have to do for work. But I started about 5 years ago just as kind of an interest thing, and just fell in love with it. I've been writing every week for 5 years. And I think what I enjoy so much, it forces you to really think. You've got to develop a thought. You've got to put it into a structure that's appealing to the readers. And then you've got to, put together a logical story that ties it all together. And then you get the reader feedback and the engagement with the readers and the community that you get with the whole blogging community and the podcasters. It just turned into this tremendous thing that to me is just really adding a lot of fulfillment in my retirement years that I really never saw coming. So it's kind of serendipity, I guess, to answer your question in one word.
Sure. You probably didn't expect that it would grow to the point where
Yeah.
So I know you start the book off with two really, I think they're great comparisons. First, everyone wonders what is next? What is retirement going to look like? And you kind of summed it up in one word. You called it freedom.
Yeah. And, Marc, when I was approaching retirement, I started the blog 3 years before I retired, and obviously once you start writing about it every week, you really start thinking about it. And, the first year I was really focused on the numbers and, making sure those were tight. And probably about 2 years before I retired, I kind of knew the numbers were good. And I started looking at more of the soft side of what's life going to be like in retirement. And the closer I got to it, I almost got obsessed about, what's it really like? Retirement is something kind of like getting married. You can't really appreciate what it's going to be like until you actually experience it, right? So to me, a big focus on the book was for people that have that same curiosity. What's it really like to retire? And nobody can explain it perfectly. And even if they could, your individual experience will probably be almost guaranteed be different than mine. But I really put a lot of energy in the book to try to explain what that transition is like, because to me, it's intriguing. And it's important that you get it right and kind of understand what it's going to be like before you get there to help, answer some of those questions of what you should be preparing for. It's so much more than just the financials.
Yeah, I think and I see it all the time on my side. It's all right, let's analyze the numbers. Let's look at, if this happens or if this scenario, and it's always, will the money run out? Well,
right.
Will you have enough money, expenses? But probably the non-quantitative aspect of retirement, the emotions, the relationships, all that stuff is probably just as important or, just as much as of a change.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the way I like to think about it is the financials, absolutely, you've got to have them, right? I mean, you've got to understand your financial situation. You've got to understand your safe withdrawal rate. You've got to understand how you're going to replace your paycheck. But I would say it's necessary, but it's not sufficient, right? You've really got to look at the non-financial side, especially in your final year of work when you're approaching the starting line, as I call it, to really think about the non-financial aspects of it. And the more time you do that, before you retire. It's been proven statistically through different studies that is the number one thing you can do to ensure a successful retirement. So I would say financial is necessary, but not sufficient.
Yeah. And I think there's a funny, I don't know if it's called a stat or a quote that says most people prepare more for a 2-week vacation than they actually do with retirement. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. With anything, prep and planning definitely will, enable more success with it.
Yeah.
The other comparison that I liked is you compare retirement to baking a cake. How did you come up with that comparison, or what goes into that?
Yeah, I guess I question how do I come up with a lot of the things I come up with, but I really like using metaphors and analogies when I write, and I think it's a nice way to think outside the box. And as I started thinking about it, I don't bake cakes obviously, but as you start thinking about the process, it's so similar to planning for retirement. If you think about it, okay, I'm going to make a cake. Okay, I'm going to retire, right? Well, what's your cake? What type of cake would you like to make? What type of life would you like to live in retirement, right? Oh, I'd like to make a chocolate cake. Okay, you better make sure you have a chocolate. I'd like to travel the world. Okay, you better make sure you have the financials in place to travel the world, right? The steps that you go through all the way through, putting it in the oven, giving it time to bake, that's kind of building your financials and getting them to the point where, they're done, they're ready. Each of the steps, there's almost a perfect correlation with the steps that you need to take as you prepare for retirement. So, hey, I went with it and I think it came out, pretty well. I think it's pretty clear to understand and it works.
Is that the point where people start, with that first, what do they want their retirement to look like? Or is there somewhere else that someone should start once they want to start planning for it?
I think most people, obviously, you're going to start with the financials, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. But I don't think you can really do the financials right unless you spend time thinking about what you want your end product to be. What type of cake do you want, right? If you've got to think about what type of lifestyle do you want to support in your retirement, and then back into the financials from that. Because, if you're going to downsize, sell your house, move on to New Jersey, high tax state, move to Tennessee and get rid of your taxes, whatever, you've got to factor that stuff in because your living expenses in retirement are really the ultimate driver for whether or not you have enough to retire. So I don't know how you can really answer the question if you're ready to retire until you've spent some time thinking about what type of lifestyle do you want to have in retirement and how much is that going to cost? To me, that's the bedrock foundation that you have to answer. So how can you do that if you haven't taken the time to think about what you want your life to be when you retire?
Yeah. When you did that for yourself, did you, go through, to the dollar or, some kind of estimate on looking at what you thought your expenses would be in retirement?
Yeah. And Mark, we've never been budgeters. I've always saved aggressively. My wife and I have always, we're very aligned in the way we think about this stuff. We've always lived below our means. We paid ourselves first. Once we automated our savings, we just kind of spent the rest, right? So we'd do nice vacations. I had frequent flyer miles, et cetera, et cetera. We knew we were saving, 20, 25% of our pay. So we could afford to spend the rest, but we never really tracked our spending. So what we did as we started getting serious about preparing for retirement, we actually tracked every penny we spent for about a year. We did 11 months. By category, right? So we just had a spreadsheet, we entered it. So we had all the major categories, actual spending for 11 months. And then what we did is we created a new column and we basically said, okay, how do we see these expenses changing in retirement? Obviously, I'm not driving to work anymore. So the car expenses should go down, not buying new clothes for work, et cetera. So we kind of thought through it category by category. Hey, we're going to start camping a lot more. So we added, some travel and entertainment type expenses. And we tried to do the best we could at, health insurance. We had company sponsored health insurance. Now, obviously we're paying, private medical. So we tried to adjust those things that we could based on the best estimates we could find. And so we took the current actual, we made a retirement projected. And then what I did is I actually ran that through to age 95. I did some inflation adjustments, in each of the categories. I looked at how spending could change. And I actually kind of laid out a projection through age 95 to make sure that we were thinking holistically and long term rather than just looking at a snapshot in time.
Sure. And I think one of the things you mentioned about especially health insurance, because I see that's an area where a lot of people are not sure. Yeah. It's an unknown. They don't know what the cost of increase of health insurance is going to be. But one thing you mentioned is you didn't go from your company's employer plan to Medicare. You didn't retire at
No,
65,
I
correct?
retired at age 55. So, I've got obviously 10 years of private medical before we're eligible for Medicare. So, yeah, that was a big factor in our decision. And basically what I did, I read all the stats and I said, okay, let's look at the kind of everything we did. We kind of hedged, so we used $2,500 a month for our estimate. We're actually paying about $2,000 now. So we used the highest reasonable estimates that we could in each of the categories as a little bit of a hedge in case we missed on a couple of major elements. We wouldn't get caught by surprise. I'd rather be surprised to the positive than surprised to the negative. So yeah, we factored in pretty expensive healthcare, and we said, okay, once the numbers say we can do it, let's not let healthcare be the reason we don't retire. Let's assume we'll be able to find it, and we just know we have to pay for it. And as it turns out, we've been able to do it. So yeah, as long as you plan for things, I don't think fear and anxiety should be the reason you don't retire, right? As long as you have the financials to cover the worst case scenarios.
Yeah. Did you ever put any kind of hedge in place that said, okay, if this doesn't work out, my plan to go back to work is this?
No, never did. I always knew once we retired, my plan was always, once I retired, I never wanted to be dependent on side hustle income. Obviously, I make a little bit of money on my blog. I made some money on the book, etc. None of that was built into our plan. We always assumed once the paycheck stops, it stops forever. And if we're not in a situation where we can do it based on that, why would I retire, right? Let's keep working. I got a good corporate job, good benefits. We'll work another year or two. But I didn't want to be in a situation where we had a high probability of having to go back to work if we missed. I'd rather assume the worst. And then if some of the things fell together better than we planned, hey, that's great. We've got a little bit more money than we probably need. That's okay. So that was the way we approached it.
And was your wife working at the time as well?
No, she worked once we had our daughter. She was a stay-at-home mom. Mm-hmm. And actually one of the things we did right, early on in my career, before we had our daughter, who's 25 now, when my wife was working, we had talked about it and we said, hey, obviously we wanted to start a family, and we both agreed that, she really wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. And we said, great, that's great. We're both aligned with that. So when she was working, we saved 100% of her pay, and we never got dependent on it. We never bought cars, we never bought houses based on her income, so that we would be in a position where once the child came along, she'd be able to quit and our budget wasn't dependent on that. And, that gave us a nice savings boost at the beginning. So yeah, she hasn't worked outside the home, since our daughter was born. And even with that though, I think that's one thing people don't necessarily think about as much as you think about leaving the workplace and what a big change it's going to be. Don't underestimate the amount of change it's going to be for a stay-at-home spouse as well. Retirement is equally big for both of you, regardless of where you're coming from.
Yeah. So how did that brings up a good topic. And you actually moved either close to or right after retirement?
Yeah, we had a vacation home up in the mountains. We lived in Atlanta at the time, and we had a vacation place we bought maybe 7 or 8 years before I retired, and we were renting it out, making some income on it. It was paying for itself. But we always knew that was our retirement plan, was to sell the big house in the city, move up to the cabin full time. So yeah, we actually moved up here. My wife was actually caring for her mom. She had Alzheimer's. So she lived with us for the last 4 or 5 years that I was working. And towards the end, she ended up being in a nursing home. And the nursing home facilities up here at the cabin were a lot better than they were down in the city. So we actually moved 2 years before my retirement just for the sake of her mother. Got her in a nice nursing home up here. My wife moved up here full time. And then I got a small apartment in the city, and I drive down in the city, Monday morning early, and then I'd come home Thursday night and work from home on Friday. So, I was home 4 nights a week, down in the city 3 nights a week. And we did that for 2 years to make the transition.
So it's almost like that. You hear, test drive your retirement, or
yeah.
That's almost like what you did with getting a feeling for it. If it, and some people, I guess they don't, it is a big change, and sometimes it's a flip of the light switch change, and they have trouble with it.
Yeah. And, I think when you think about moving, the hardest part of it, I think, is your friendships, your relationships, your dentist, all your doctors, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And doing it the way we did it actually gave us a really good opportunity to be engaged in the community up here. I was home every weekend. So, we started volunteering with some charities. We started getting to know people. We started going to a church. We made the connections that would become our retirement life. while we were still working, even though we were in a new environment. So it worked out really well for us. Not something everybody can do, but it really worked out well for us to be able to do it that way.
Yeah. And I guess let me ask you this, what changed in terms of like your daily day during retirement?
Oh, everything. It's incredible. And that gets into that question of what's retirement really going to be like, right? Mm-hmm. And I would say it evolved. The first probably 3 or 4 months, I was just so happy to not be working. I didn't hate my job or anything, but I was so excited about getting to retirement and that ultimate freedom and not having to set an alarm clock and all those things. So the first 3 or 4 months, I really just disconnected, really enjoyed the serendipity of an open day, no scheduling and things like that. And what I found probably at about the 4-month mark is, and a lot of people do find this, there is some value to having some structure in your day, right? And when you're working, your entire day is structured. You got to go to the office, you've got meetings, you've got deliverables, you got your monthly reports, et cetera, et cetera. In retirement, all that's gone. There's no structure at all. Right. So what I found works well for me, and I think everybody, and I talk about this quite a bit in the book, you kind of have to play around with, how much structure works for you. Some people like to have their entire day structured, and it's a huge adjustment going to retirement. I found that a little bit of both works well. So my mornings are structured. I go to the gym every day. We have, different classes that our gym offers. So I go to the gym every morning and take different classes. Our gyms are opened up now in Georgia. So we were one of the early states to open, and I missed it, when it was closed, but now we're back in business. So I go to the gym every morning and then, come home, walk the dogs in the woods. We have beautiful woods behind our cabin. And then, about 10, 11 o'clock, the day is kind of less structured and we just do whatever we want to do for the rest of the day. And having a little bit of balance like that works out really well for us.
Yeah. Did you plan or have you done a lot of traveling in retirement?
Yeah, we'd always planned on wanting to do quite a bit. Our daughter lives in Seattle. She's 25 now, as I mentioned. So she's married. Our granddaughter's out there. Her husband's in the military. Mm-hmm. So last summer we took a 3-month, 10,000-mile trip. Oh, wow. We drove cross country, took our time. So the first year I retired, we took a train trip. My wife always has wanted to go cross country on train. We're like, great, let's go cross country on train. So we took it was 7,000 miles, I think, went from Georgia all the way up to Washington, D.C., out through Chicago to Seattle, got off the train in Seattle, stayed there for a while, and then came down the California coast and back across the southern route. So we did a big loop on a train. That was great. Mm-hmm. Last year, we did the 3-month RV trip and spent, the summer in the Pacific Northwest, which was great. This year, obviously, with COVID, things are a little bit changed. We're taking off in August. We're going to go up to Michigan. Mm-hmm. And we were planning on flying out to Seattle and spending a couple of weeks. Obviously, that got canceled. So we've rescheduled our trip to Seattle. We're going to fly out there, this fall and spend maybe 3 weeks out there just flying out. So since we're not going to be doing the big RV trip, we said, okay, what do we want to do in lieu of that? So we're just planning a shorter 1-month trip up to northern Michigan, the Upper Peninsula, visit some family, get out in the woods a little bit, and get away from the Georgia heat. So yeah, you mix in some travel, you mix in some good stuff in your home environment, and having, again, that's kind of like the structure thing, having part of your life where you're free to travel and do things, but still have a home base where you kind of have your relationships and your sense of community. That's worked out well for us to mix the two of those together.
Sure. What's been the biggest, I'd call it difference of, from you going through that 3 years of planning to what was not what you expected in retirement?
Yeah, I think as much as I was looking forward to the liberation and the freedom, I still don't think I grasped how significant that really is, to have complete control over every minute of your day is so liberating. To be able to do only the things that you choose to do, is a huge change in life. With that, I guess comes a warning that you're also responsible to fill your day with things that provide meaning and get you motivated and give you encouragement and, fulfillment, because nobody's going to do it for you anymore. You don't have a boss, right? It's all on you. And I think that whole transition into that freedom and that requirement to fill it with things that matter, that was probably the biggest surprise that I think both my wife and I both faced the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know you mentioned that freedom, and I think even in the book you equate it to freedom that you've never, no one's had, since they were a child.
Yeah.
And I can actually relate to that. I remember, hanging out with my friends on my friend's steps when we were about 10 years old. And my friend's grandfather came up to us and he said, guys, don't forget this time. This is going to be the best time of your lives. You don't have, cares, responsibilities. And we're like, yeah, whatever. But
Yeah.
you look back at it and you're like, he was right.
Yeah, exactly. And now you're saying that to the kids, and they're not listening to you any more than you were listening to him, right? The cycle comes around. But yeah, and I use that analogy in my book. I talk about how basically retirement is the summer vacation that never ends, right?
Yeah.
And if you were like me, you're all excited about summer vacation, and then hey, school's out, and everybody's running through the playground, and you're all excited. About a month later, you're bored, right? You're sitting around going, Mom, I'm bored, and you can't afford that to happen in retirement because you're not going back to school in 3 months, right? So it's a good analogy, but it points out the importance. If you think back to those summers when you started getting bored in the last couple of weeks of summer, which I think most people did, that's a good way to frame retirement, because if you don't do anything and you just expect, hey, I'm just going to have fun, and it doesn't always work out that way. You've got to have some, you got to have some design around what you want your life to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's true. Going back to some of the preparation work, when, for example, how much of the planning or preparation did you put into, and it's kind of going back to the financials, but what if there was a market crash, right? After I retired, or what if they cut Social Security, or kind of these doomsday scenarios?
Yeah.
How did you account for those in your planning?
Yeah. Great questions, Mark. And I think everybody's got to run some, negative type scenarios. So what we did, I talked about this cash flow thing that I did through age 95. And basically, we had projections of how much we were going to spend, what's inflation going to be, right? So I could play around with the inflation rates. Mm-hmm. If you think about the big unknowns are investment returns, spending patterns, and are you going to have enough money to last until you die, right? Everybody's worried about running out of money. So basically, we played around with scenarios where we basically use 75% of Social Security, and that's what we've always used, again, as a hedge. Everything we've done has had kind of a conservative tilt to it.
Sure.
So we use 75% of Social Security. We put in various, markets don't work as well as you think, and inflation runs higher than you think. How does that look? The concern is if you put everything to the negative, you might end up working 5 years longer than you really have to, right? Because everything negative probably isn't going to happen. At the same time, you have to be cognizant that it could happen. So, we basically went through each one of the major risks, and we kind of looked at it and said, what's our best option to mitigate that risk? So as an example, bear market. Okay, fine. It's going to happen. We all know it's going to happen. You just don't know when. So to mitigate the sequence of return risk, which is the market's taking a major downturn early in your retirement, we put in place the bucket strategy where we keep, 3 years of cash, another 5 years basically in bonds and, investments that hopefully will be more stable. Maybe you don't get the returns, but they're more stable. And then we, reserve the equities for bucket 3, which is maybe 7 or 8 years out. So we could go 7 or 8 years without selling an equity, stock, and we'd be okay. We did that as a mitigation of sequence of return risk. Longevity risk, right? What if you live to 100? So, we've looked at that, and the two things we're doing there is at this point, we're planning on delaying Social Security until age 70, I think, or 72. No, 70. Sorry, that's our RMDs now are 72. But yeah, we'll push Social Security out to the latest, optimal start date, just really as a longevity risk. It compounds off a higher base. You're getting that 8% return for every year that you defer it, and we're not going to need the money. So that's kind of a longevity risk thing. So basically what we did is we looked at all the risks, and for longevity risk, delay Social Security as long as you can. That'll give you a higher base. That should mitigate the chance of longevity risk. We're debating maybe getting a deferred annuity at some point, again, as a longevity risk. So in essence, that's what we did is we looked at all of those potential risks. Sequence of return risk, we've got the bucket strategy. Longevity risk, delay Social Security. Looking at those types of things and building in as much defense as you can. And then once you're reasonably confident that you've addressed your risks, don't let that fear keep you from retiring. Get on with it. Life's our whole goal of early retirement was really, you don't know how long you're going to be healthy. So let's get out as early as we can so we can get as many good years of being able to do the things that we want to do while we're still healthy. That was the whole drive behind our early retirement. So once we kind of knew we had enough, our life isn't about the financials. It's really about getting on with living life. So we made the decision to go ahead and pull the trigger, and it's worked out well. We're 2 years in, loving life. And we had a little bit of a blip in March with the market. Didn't bother us at all. We had our cash buffer. Everything was fine. So, so far it's working out, knock on wood.
Yeah. Did you do any, hedging or planning on the after-tax versus pre-tax aspect of some of your retirement accounts?
Yeah, we sure did. Like most baby boomers, we when I was coming up through the workplace, you didn't have Roth accounts, right? All you had was the before tax 401ks and things like that. So, obviously I was saving everything pre-tax, it's the way to go. Everybody's telling you that. Well, the reality of it is now the tax man's coming after the money, right? And if you look at the required minimum distributions and if you wait until age 72 to start pulling that stuff, you can really get hammered on taxes.
Sure.
So we've put together a very solid plan. We're doing Roth conversions every year. We basically look at our marginal tax bracket situation. And let's say there's $40,000 left between the income I'm getting from my pension, maybe my blog, some other side income type things. If there's $40,000 left between that and the top of the marginal tax bracket, we'll go ahead and take a $40,000 withdrawal from the 401k pre-tax and move it into the Roth, pay the taxes on it. And especially now with the current tax structure for, married filed jointly, the 2017, 2018 reductions are significant. So we're really taking advantage of those to move as much of that before tax money out as we can. So yeah, there's a tax optimization element that we had. I wrote a whole post on kind of our retirement drawdown strategy, and it kind of went through all of this logic, how we're addressing these various elements. And since then, that was written before I retired. Now that we're in retirement, we're doing exactly that. We're doing annual Roth conversions. We're doing as much as we can to mitigate the tax obligations long term.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of those annual Roth conversions, and like you said, fill up your tax bracket bucket.
Yeah.
And it's everyone says they think they're paying too much tax, and I get it. A lot of people are paying tax, but you always also have to look at the brackets historically, and most likely in the future they're only going in one direction.
Yeah.
And you look at all this stimulus now that's going out, and eventually at some point the bill is going to be due. And usually that's just going to mean tax brackets are going to increase in the future. So
that's right. I actually put a chart together when the new tax brackets came out, and it's shocking how much lower they are. You go up to $350,000 of income, and you're only at a 24% marginal tax rate. That's huge. Now, granted, if you're trying to play the ACA, the Affordable Care Act for health insurance, there's subsidies, right? There's things that you have to be aware of. If you blow up your subsidies because you're doing big Roth conversions, make sure you understand all the details of it. But there's definitely, now is probably the golden era of doing Roth conversions, because I don't think taxes will be lower in my lifetime.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah.
So what's next for the blog? Are you continuing to just write for the blog?
Yeah, I write every week. I really enjoy, and part of what I found when I first started the blog, it was 100% focused on the financial, because that's where I was, right? And then as I got about a year away from retirement, it started more about, hey, what's this retirement lifestyle stuff going to be? And now that I'm actually in retirement, I kind of mix it up. I still throw some financial stuff in there. I throw in some lifestyle stuff. I really like the challenge of writing every week and coming up with articles that are entertaining, and my readership base has grown quite a bit. I got the Retirement Blog of the Year from the Plutus Awards, which is the Academy Awards of blogging. So, I think one, like you said in the introduction, there aren't a lot of people that are writing or talking about this stuff that have actually retired,
Yeah.
right? Most bloggers are kind of the big fire enthusiasts, which is great. I got a lot of friends in the fire community, but a lot of the baby boomers can't really relate to them, right? They're like, hey, I'm 60. I don't relate to those 40-year-old kids that are, so being a baby boomer myself and just in the early phases of retirement, I feel like I'm in a good place because there's so many people in my demographic, but there aren't a lot of people writing about it and writing about the actual experience. So I'm having a blast. I really enjoy it. I get, one of the things you have to look for when you get into retirement is that reward structure that you had at work, right? You get a pay raise, you get a pat on the back from the boss because you did a good presentation, whatever. That goes away. Yeah. And finding things that give you that sense of achievement is really important. And my blog is something that gives me that sense of achievement. I enjoy doing it. It's mentally stimulating. Mm-hmm. I have great social interaction with the community, and I get that sense of reward. So I don't, at this point, things can always change. I've got the freedom to do it or not do it, obviously.
Right.
If I get tired of doing it, I'll stop doing it. But at this point, I just love doing it. And I think people enjoy, reading about a fellow baby boomer on the journey, and people can relate to it. So, yeah, it's fun. I enjoy it.
And what about on the book? They say most people don't stop. Once they do one, they don't stop at one.
Yeah, that's a good question, Mark. People have been saying that to me, and I was like, it's kind of like I ran a marathon. I wanted to run a marathon before I was 40, and I did. And I was like, okay, I did that. I'm not going to do another one. It was too much work, And I kind of feel that way about the book. Like, man, that's a lot of work, And you always hear it's a lot of work, but until you actually go through it, it's like, man, that's a lot of work. Having said that, the publisher actually approached me about writing another one. I think, they're pretty happy with the book. And I was like, I'm going to take some time off. I just finished this one up, but let's keep in touch, So who knows, Mark? I mean, I really like the serendipity is probably my favorite word right now. It's that sense of exploration and just see where things go. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how I'm living life. So I don't know, maybe I'll write another book. Maybe I won't, it's if I feel like it, I will, So if I were a betting man, I'd say the odds are probably 60-40 that I'll write another book,
nice.
But who knows? We'll see.
Yeah, no, the first one, it was a great book. I read it over the weekend. It's full of tips you don't find in some other books on retirement. So definitely enjoyed it.
Well, thank you, Mark. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So, all right. So that just about wraps up our show for today. Fritz, how best can someone find out more information about your blog, your book, if they want to reach out and get in touch with you?
Yeah, I appreciate it, Mark. Easy to find. I'm at the Retirement Manifesto, and yes, it has the THE. I don't know why I put that in there, but it's there. And everybody retired. No, it's the Retirement Manifesto. So theretirementmanifesto.com, and I've got a page on there that's got my book. You can look it up on Amazon. But come and follow along. Sign up for my emails. I'd love to have you on the team. And yeah, that's probably. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm everywhere else. But probably the blog domain is probably the easiest place to find me.
Great, and thank you very much for being on the show today.
Well, thank you for the honor, Mark. It's been great chatting with you.
And thank you, everyone, for tuning into today's episode. Until next time, have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the Agent of Wealth podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Bautis Financial. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional financial planning and investment advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investments and financial planning.